We are back with the Hubscale podcast, where we dive into the minds of security leaders all around the world. This week, we have Karl Mattson, the CISO of No Name, the leader in API security. Karl, it's great to have you on.
Elliott, thanks for having me.
No problem at all. So I guess for everybody listening who doesn't know Karl Mattson, give a quick introduction to yourself.
Sure. Karl Mattson, I'm the CISO for No Name Security. We're an API security company, and I've been with the company about 2 years. This is my first part of my career that I've been a part of a security company. Spent about a decade in financial services at a couple different CISO roles prior to No Name, and then prior to that, my first career was about a decade in government.
Awesome stuff. So take me back to your early days in your career then.
Mm.
How did you start off and what's the journey been like?
Um, I kind of won the career lottery because after high school, being 19 years old, I enlisted in the Army, and I got assigned to NSA. And that really was the first opportunity for me to get good training and enter the security field in a way that allowed me to kind of turn that into my career. And so, moving through different organizations, mostly like large corporate entities and various types of security and technology roles. And then 2 years ago, I decided it was time to make another career move, and I joined No Name after having been an early customer of the company.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. And one of the topics today, which is so many topics we can dive into, but it's actually around building a security team and program
Yep.
within a security vendor. So just talk to me about that a little bit.
Well, the unknown for me moving from a bunch of corporate gigs in the past is moving to security vendor, like how much would be different in the security function itself. Everything's the same. The chessboard of protecting an organization and your data and supporting your customers is really exactly the same. The only real difference is like in the banking world, I would lean into regulatory requirements or control frameworks as the reason we need to do A, B, and C. In No Name, I can lean into customer requirements. So when customers, require a certain level of assurance and trust in us, the integrity of our product, that's the rationale to build the building blocks of a great security program. So really, what I'm really doing is I'm doing the exact same things, but I'm kind of sourcing inspiration from customers where I used to source that inspiration from, let's say, like government regulators.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And is there any difference between obviously the hyper growth that No Name has been on over the past few years, and then obviously maybe a financial backing from the corporate world where they're not maybe growing as fast? What's the difference in terms of the security program you have to build there?
Yeah, certainly we had the luxury of having growth. Like I was employee 65, and then a year later we've got 250 employees, and that growth trajectory meant that we had to invest pretty fast. So a lot of times what we would do, and I did this, you'd bring in technologies that you're already familiar with, for example. So rather than go out and do an RFP for three different CSPMs or three different EDR solutions, you just kind of take the pulse of the team internally about what have we used in our career that works, and let's just go do it. And so that really accelerates like the time to shore up the defenses when you're just leaning into the technologies and the practices that you already have. And then so something like an EDR deployment might take 3 weeks, whereas in a bank it might take a full year to do something like that.
Yeah, no, the speed of it seems a lot more faster, doesn't it? Which is awesome.
Yep.
But I guess one of the things I really wanted to dig into today, Carl. I know you and I have had conversations about the past, and you're obviously a venture advisor at Wild Ventures, CyberStarts, and all
Yep.
these other cool venture firms. I guess for a lot of the listeners do really are intrigued by speaking to individuals like yourself who really go out there and speak to entrepreneurs and really get into the weeds about the stuff with these people who are growing the businesses. But it'd be great if you could dive into that a moment about advising the startups and everything along those lines around tips for the founders you meet and what's your kind of thoughts going into these meetings.
Yeah, a few thoughts, and the first is that I think as a bank CISO, when I would do engagements with early stage companies, I had to pay very close attention to things like conflicts of interest, and so making sure that my participation when I talked in an advisory capacity was uncompensated and unpaid. That's something. So I learned early in my career to look at the reward for me as developing good relationships with technologists who are really pushing the envelope. And then from time to time, I could buy that technology that was sort of new to the market and did doing something innovative. And so that's what I first start with is think of the benefit for your company by having those engagements and focus on that rather than the personal benefit. Things like advisory shares or consulting fees like that. So one of the key things I think I learned is if you catch me on any given day, I might have different opinions on different things, right? So like let's say for example that I have a pain point of privileged access one day, and then next the same question a week later, my biggest pain point is something like patch management, right? So I would CEOs in particular need a number of data points. Talk to everybody and collect data points because it doesn't matter what someone's track record is or what company they're coming from. Their vantage point is only a point in time, and it's only representative of like one style of security philosophy or one architecture. So it's important to have like dozens of data points to collect like good, meaningful feedback. I know that there's a company out there that we've all heard of that I gave very, very, very specific advice to, and they did not take it. And I was pretty disappointed in that. And it turns out that they are a multi-billion-dollar company who made exactly the right decisions along the way. I don't know everything, and no one does. So asking a lot of questions and keeping those relationships going is really important because on any given day our priorities change or our opinions change, and I'm not immune to changing my mind, and I like to be convinced too sometimes that a CEO or a founder of a company is thinking through a problem set with more sophistication than I am. So when I talk to CISOs who want to get involved like with advisory conversations, I think the important thing is just to is if you put yourself out there, and anybody listening can shoot me an email. I'm just Carl M at no name. I know a dozen companies who would love to talk. That doesn't mean that there's some sort of immediate like share options and cash outflow, but there are founders who just want to know what CISOs are thinking as they think through problem sets. And those introductions are really easy to make. There's a lot of like open arms for that kind of conversation.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it goes into what I kind of say quite a lot. It's about paying forward, right? I think I
Yep.
was talking to
Yep.
a CISO, another CISO was on the podcast a couple of days ago, and he was talking about really early on in his career, he was just going out there and not really making any traction with what he wanted to do. But then over the time, once he started digging into it and started really helping people out later on down the line, then that started where you do get paid for these types of things. And it is a kind of a career as well. And then he actually went into the other side and started with a VC firm. So that's part of the journey that you've got to go on, and it's kind of that paying forward. And I think that another thing as well, because a lot of founders listen to this, and I've had a lot of founders on the podcast call. What kind of advice would you give to yourself as a CISO, obviously been a CISO for many, many years? What advice would you give to founders looking to scale, or for kind of that, but they've got the inception maybe of the idea, but then going out there and finding investment, speaking to CISOs around the world? What kind of advice would you give to people like that?
I mean, I think a couple of the greatest hits that I usually share with founders is number one, there's a much bigger market out there than founders maybe assume. So, for example, if you take any category of technology where there's a dominant player, and let's just use a couple examples just for the sake of discussion, like CrowdStrike or Okta or Palo Alto or whoever, those biggest companies in the world in security, they really only have a very small percentage of market share. I think CrowdStrike still only has like less than 10% of the world endpoint protection market, or Palo Alto still only has like 15% of the cloud security, whatever the number is. There's a belief sometimes with founders like, oh, I can't do that because that's CyberArk already does that or Okta already does that. And the reality is as successful and no disrespect to any of those companies, there's so much more customer out there who are using so many more technologies. And so when I talk to founders, I think I recommend look at the long-term category. Is this a category of technology or security that is likely to still be there 10 years from now? And if that answer is yes, build in that area where you have a domain expertise, you can build something relevant. Because I think we all know that CrowdStrike and Okta, and they're going to be here 10 years from now. If you're making up a new category entirely, that is a very risky thing to start because now you're talking about convincing the world that there's something new that they should be doing that they've never done before. And so I do think that the overwhelming majority of founders maybe scared away from building a technology or a company that competes with the big, the behemoth companies, I think that's a much safer place to start. That's personal opinion. The other thing too is to make some choices about what kind of company you're not. Um, the complexity that you can incur by building both on-prem and SaaS technologies. Like you kind of have to start somewhere, and starting somewhere means that you have to identify what customers are not going to be a good fit. It's counterintuitive for a founder to think about saying no to revenue, right? I don't want to say no to a new paying customer. I'm a small business. Well, the reality is there's only a small subset of customers who are your ideal customer. And that ideal customer, it needs exactly what you need when at the right time, in the right place, and the right sort of formula is there. And that mixture is an ideal customer profile. And so the earlier that a customer, or the earlier that a founder can really hone in on that ideal customer profile, what they do is they stop wasting their time on all the sales pitches and all the POVs that ultimately are not going to serve them well as a young company. And the ideal customer profile is not necessarily who the founders think it's going to be. It's what you listen to the market. The market will tell you. But by having those dialogues with customers early and with CISOs who aren't customers early, to really hone in on that really specific subset of customers that are exactly what you need at an early stage.
Yeah, I think that's so important as well. I was reading the Zero to IPO book by the Okta co-founder, and he talks about that exact point. Do not go after every single customer possible. Do not change your
Yep.
product for a certain customer, and everything along those lines as well. So no, really, really good advice.
Yeah, I mean, companies like Walmart and Department of Defense and Wells Fargo and like, yeah, careful what you wish if you're going to, hinge your entire business model on landing that biggest behemoth corporation in the world, when the company down the street might just be the right customer. And that's an easy thing to miss, is that some founders don't want to think that they want to only chase like the biggest customers in the world, and that's not a very good recipe for success for many companies.
Yeah, you're so right as well. And you talked about there about kind of going out early doors. Just explain that in a little bit more detail. Obviously, people and founders have a great network sometimes, but some, especially kind of first-time founders, don't necessarily do. So how would you go out there and really kind of look at the market and assess the market as an early stage founder?
Well, great question. I think that's the first of all, the accelerant is who you take money from, your investors. And so getting into networks of investors with like reputable investors can really facilitate those early discussions. But those also include like things like angel investing syndicates or cooperative for investments that give you some new entry point into new markets. But there is no real replacement for getting on a plane and getting on the road and hitting the conferences and hitting the exhibit halls and dinners. There is I won't quote him. I'm not sure that he would appreciate the personal quote, but I know one of the foremost investors in our field, and his prediction on company success is literally a ratio of how much time the founder spends on an airplane, or how many miles they travel on an airplane. How many miles they travel is directly proportionate to the level of success and valuation of the company. That's it. That's his model. So for a founder who might be based wherever you are in the world, if you're not on the plane going to meet people in person, for industry outreach, for early customer meetings, for sales pitches, for customer success and renewals and ongoing. If that founder is not out there on the plane meeting people face to face, there's not a lot of companies that do well. And so that's maybe a shot across the bow to the founders. Being a founder is not a work from home job. Being a founder is being on the road. So
Yeah, no, it's
you know
totally.
that, Elliot. You just got back from the UK. I mean, like that's yeah,
Yeah.
that's the way it works. So
Yeah, you've got to be out there, and I think the COVID era was it maybe knocked people back a little bit in terms of,
yep,
oh, do we have to go out anymore? Can we just do it over Zoom? And I think over the
yep,
past year or so, it starts to get really a little bit more open. Obviously, with RSA this year, there was 45,000 people there.
yep, yep.
It was super crazy. So no, I really like that advice, honestly, Carl. I think you're definitely right, and I love the quote about how many air miles as well, which is absolutely fantastic. But so it's I guess I just want to take you back to No Name a little bit. I know you probably
Sure,
talk
sure.
about No Name all the time, but obviously being kind of leader in the category, API security is something that needs to be really looked at more. Obviously, Gartner kind of recognized it going to be the number one attack vector in 2022, right? The one last year.
Yep,
So
yep.
just tell me a little bit more about kind of No Name and your journey so far.
Sure. Well, APIs aren't new. APIs in various forms have been around for 20 years. But the API sort of used to be like the unspoken facilitator of machine to machine communications, mostly on an internal network. But they because APIs allow systems to interconnect, we started to use them broadly for much more sort of public purposes. So APIs used to be internal facing. Now we're exposing them externally to do integrations with third parties and external parties. We're selling products and services, and the data is moving out via API. So what's really changed is the API is now become the front door. Used to be web applications, and now increasingly the API itself is the front door of an organization. So taking an organization like or Smartsheet or Salesforce, any SaaS technology that you can think of, really what they're doing is they're serving APIs to the world. And so that because now the API is sort of present as the front door for so many companies, the integrity or the level of precision that we have to get right on an API has to be there, because now it's actually the keys to the kingdom, or it's the crown jewel of data is via API. And so for me, it was about 5 years ago where working in a financial, the modernizing our mobile application meant us going to an API centric architecture, and that really started me on the journey of thinking about how do I secure this channel. And it took a couple of false starts, right? Things that I had to learn how to be a leader, and I had to learn how to think about the problem set. And then after a couple of years, then meeting No Name, finding that there was kind of a kindred spirit into how to solve this problem set. And for me, as a financial services CISO, they were solving it in the way that it resonated with me. These were my priorities, and it matched what they were doing from a technology perspective. So when I started talking to Oz about joining No Name, it made a lot of sense because this was a particular technical security problem that I had grappled with for some time, and I felt like I can tell this story because I know that people are going through this, and they're still going through this sort of discovery process about what is this chess game of API security that I need to account for as a security leader. And so I think that we're seeing a very rapid shift of towards companies where it's not just the big SaaS tech companies that are API led now. It's kind of everybody. It's pharmaceuticals, it's automotive, it's energy, because now they've all taken on the API as an API centric application model, and that trend is relatively early in its lifetime. That's not going to stop over the next 10 years. And so security teams are really grappling with how to develop this competency in securing APIs because they're becoming sort of core to everything we do.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's really cool. I had somebody else on the podcast a while ago and we was talking about APIs, and 9 times out of 10, the CISOs don't even know how many APIs they actually have. So it's
Oh, yeah, yeah.
so
I
it's
mean,
definitely interesting.
an API is an asset, right? And so, I mean, what the top 20 critical controls, doesn't matter what frame were used. Control number one is know your assets. And that's the fundamental, or it's the original sin with securing APIs is if I don't know where they are and what they consist of, I have a very hard time controlling them or protecting the data. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's such an interesting topic. I've been staying very close to it, especially over the past couple of years. But I guess just switching it again back to kind of the your kind of current role and the modernized CISO kind of thing. And what is the biggest challenges you face as a CISO in this kind of modern day?
um, I think that we have, from like a security challenge, we have a very acute version of something that most companies are feeling, which is like software supply chain. That is such a concern for us because we're a product company. Our software is and IP is our business, and so and that's not it's not the case at a lot of companies across the enterprise, but our software is everything. And so it's the integrity of the software. It's ensuring that the developers have the right systems, but they're hyper secure, that our source code is defect free, but also, the pipelines and the repos that we have are hardened. And so that when we're going to market with a software product, that software product is not only squeaky clean, but I have also that I could show evidence of that that hygiene, that hardening to our customers, because we are a product company, and every customer now is sort of raising the bar in terms of how they expect us to demonstrate how secure our software is, which is exactly the right question, and it's exactly my obligation to really focus on those product hygiene, secure development mechanics, so that we can evidence that to our customer base.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting because obviously everything changes as time goes on, and even if you look at the future of security, I know we don't want to really dive into AI because you
Yeah,
probably talked about that multiple times, but
all good. Yeah.
yeah, no, it's just interesting how it's going to kind of evolve over the next 5 years and 10 years really. So because the attackers are not going to stop, it's just going to get worse, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and not to be a contrarian, I don't. Maybe there are so many sort of security implications of AI, but I personally think that before we get to some of the more sophisticated use cases of like attackers using AI to attack us, I just want our developers who to use it smartly, to use, like, for example, if we can give a developer like the ability to securely use AI assist technologies as co-pilots to putting good product in production, and even more defect free or higher quality, like, that's a really good thing. But it's also a risk, right? So we have to make sure that we're equipping people to use whether it's GitHub Copilot or Microsoft Office or whatever the case is, all these technologies that are kind of baking AI into it. That's the I kind of like, I'll call it the friendly use case, and I want to enable that friendly use case and enable responsible use, because the sophisticated attacker stuff is going to be out there waiting for us, but I don't want to ignore the opportunity to take advantage of some of these accelerations right now.
Yeah, definitely. I think over the next couple of years, there's some really cool businesses gonna evolve out of especially the AI and ML
Yep.
machine security businesses, which is pretty awesome. But no, that's really cool stuff. And obviously, me being a recruiter, I always like to kind of dive into a little bit about kind of tips and tricks for people to break into security,
Yep.
especially for people like yourself, Carl. So anybody who's wanting to get into security, especially these days, what type of advice would you give to people?
Um, First, a number really powerful networks that require nothing other than a little bit of donation of your time, and you get fantastically well connected. So just like a great example would be OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project. Anybody can contribute, go to OWASP chapter meetings, contribute to projects. And in those, Cloud Security Alliance, InfraGard, there's a number of them, but just taking OWASP, for example, you have some of the world's foremost experts in security contributing to OWASP projects, along with people who are unemployed and people who are college students as part of a project team. And I know several people in my professional network. That's how they've made their career, is to establish credibility and relationships at a place like that. And there are so many out there, from military veterans communities to things like Cyversity or United Cybersecurity Alliance, who really focus on supporting women and minority candidates through their career progress. All of these things I'm mentioning are free, and they all have the theme to them about it's a build a relationship. Relationships are pivotal to getting involved with like-minded professionals who, now that you have a network that of people who know who you are, magically things happen in terms of when jobs open and people start new companies and there's roles open. So regardless of where you are in your career level, there's a community who wants you and who wants your contribution. So
Yeah, definitely for everybody listening, I'll put some links down
yep.
underneath so people can click on those as well. Like Carl mentioned, they're all free, which is pretty awesome. But Carl, we're wrapping up the podcast today, but there's always one question I'd like to ask. If you had to go back to the beginning of your career, what advice would you give to yourself?
Um, Great question. Probably what I would spend less time on. I have two master's degrees, and I spent a lot of time pursuing post-secondary education. To be perfectly frank, I think that, and maybe this is dating myself a little bit. Those were gates that I felt like I had to go through before I'd make the next step. But I think that for a lot of professionals today, you can make remarkable progress in landing a great job without the fancy university degree. And I probably would go. I love being in college, and I really appreciate my programs. But things don't have to happen in serial. So that you can go part time and take classes online now. And I think those are the kinds of things that it took me a while to see. I was probably 31 years old when I finished my second master's degree, and that probably I didn't need to do that in sort of serial format.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. I think now, especially with the day and age, everything's online, and
Yep.
I think you can kind of break things up. But no,
Yep.
Carl, it's really, really good advice. Really good advice. Anything else?
Oh, last thing. The best career accident that I ever walked into was, during a time that I wasn't working. I was unemployed. I paid for myself to go to a big fancy conference, and I paid for airfare and the hotel and all those types of things. But I invested in myself at a time because a lot of people won't go to conferences or they won't do certain things because the company's not paying for it. Invest in yourself. Those conferences like an RSA or a Cyber Tech in New York or Tel Aviv are hugely important for like career networks. And so even if companies have like they're not traveling right now, I think it's just a good investment in a person's own career to take a couple days off and buy a plane ticket. I think that's really time and money well spent.
I would completely agree. I think I've only personally just started going to conferences over the past maybe year or so, and it's definitely been a huge eye opener to actually look somebody and shake them in the hand and meet them people
Yep.
face to face and network. So no, again, really, really good advice, Carl, and no, appreciate you coming on the podcast. I am looking forward to seeing your journey, especially yourself and No Name over the next couple of years and see what you guys can do. But yeah, really exciting times and thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Elliot.
Thank you. Bye bye.